Hey folks, remember, Betteridge's law states that if a headline has a question mark at the end, you can probably answer it with the word no. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about UK car magazines, specialist car magazines. I don't really have a handle on how the rest of the world is, but I know that most countries are going through a kind of similar thing with their car magazines, from what I can tell. But I'll concentrate mainly on the UK. And hopefully answer the question in one form or another. So I've been a writer, I've been a photographer for magazines, I was almost a publisher of magazines. I'm also a website owner and developer, and I specialise in social networks and stuff like that in terms of development, as well as owning Retro Rides and doing the show and all of that stuff. So I have a little bit of insight into this from a whole load of different angles, and I've got an awful lot of friends that are within the industry itself. So I think maybe a little bit of history and kind of leading up to where we are now. So if you look back at the sort of 70s and 80s, there were car magazines. Things like Custom Car and Street Machine already existed. Classic and Sports Car existed. Car and Car Conversions was out and about. Practical Classics was there. There were a whole raft of magazines. So back in the 70s and I guess to the mid-80s, car magazines, or magazines in general, were quite a heavy thing to produce. You had lots of typesetting and printing presses that were, it was a big deal to be a publisher. But also you had a captive market. People, there wasn't that much on TV, and magazines were a big thing. And then towards the end of the 80s and then into the 90s, you had this big boom in magazines, particularly specialist car magazines, because you had colour printing, you had desktop publishing, so DTP, so typesetting became a lot easier, camera and film scanning became a lot easier. Just the whole production became a lot easier, so it became democratised and you could have a lot more magazines. But still we're in a situation where there was nothing kind of to rival that source of information. And as a result of that, magazine kind of boomed and got specialist and got niche, and then you had the likes of Max Power and Volksworld, and you had Classic Ford, and you had Revs or whatever it's called. I think Evo started, and you had all of these things that were coming out at that time, that were coming out because it was easier to publish, and then that continued all the way up into the early 2000s, and we got Retro Cars magazine as a result of that kind of thing. And then there was Retro Ford, and then there's PPC, which came kind of out of the death of car and car conversions, I guess. And you had Ultra VW got launched, and just like 1,000,001 niche titles. French Car magazine, Ultra Performance VW, Banzai, Japanese performance car, all this stuff. Like they all just came about, and it was a brilliant time. It was a brilliant time. There were hundreds of magazines, but it was also a dangerous time because in the early 2000s the web was becoming a bit more accessible. So the internet had been around for ages, and I will do a video on communities and all that kind of stuff in terms of internet and web stuff. But in the early 2000s the web was becoming a bit more ubiquitous. You had the very early germination of Facebook and stuff like that, but that will play a part later on. But the magazines at this point made kind of a bad decision, which you can see in retrospect, and there were people at the time advising them not to make those bad decisions. But it was difficult. So the film industry and the music industry also made bad decisions, but they made an interestingly different bad decision. So music and film made a bad decision in that they the stuff was being shared online, and as quite correctly from their point of view, it was copyright infringement, and they just shut it down. They did not then provide an alternative, and that's where they went wrong. They did not go, well, actually, if these people are doing this already, let's just own this space. And then iTunes came along, and Amazon then ate up everything else. So they eventually kind of semi-righted their decision, but they're still, like, companies have fallen apart, record labels have fallen apart as a result of not embracing and then pushing it. Magazines did a different thing. They didn't have that problem, so they didn't have people scanning the magazines and sticking them online, and that's why they were losing sales. What people were doing was getting their information online. And they then tried to compete with the internet. And you can't compete with the internet when you're a magazine that's being published on a monthly basis. Your news is old, your events are old, your kind of upcoming events are old, your for sales ads don't work anymore. Like eBay just ate your market, Craigslist just ate your market, doesn't exist anymore. And that was a good reason to buy a magazine for a lot of people. And they didn't adapt, they tried to compete. And there was some slow later adaptation, but the damage had been done. And I think that's kind of where it went a bit wrong. I think if they'd have embraced it all a bit more, if they'd have made their own websites the absolute business, then I think we wouldn't be in the situation we are in now. And the situation we are in now is as a result of all of the competition they had and the rising cost of paper, the profit margin got squeezed on magazines and publishers, and the publishers were used to the 2000s and the 90s where they were making loads of money, and publishers didn't like losing money as far as they were concerned. So they started selling off large sections of magazines. So A&S got sold to Future Publishing, who then sold a bunch of those magazines, and they were going to sell to, there were some of them they didn't want to sell to Unity Media, so they sold them to someone else. And then I think Unity bought them. All sorts of politics happened in that. Anyway, ultimately, where we are now is that Kelsey Publishing pretty much own the majority of the specialist car magazines. So Haymarket have got a few, and Unity still exists with a reduced portfolio, and PPC have PPC and Retro Ford. And we're in a situation where the way Kelsey works is, as far as I know, so if anybody wants to correct me on this, feel free. As far as I know, they work in a way that a magazine will have a set budget. The editor will work to that set budget, and any extra money they can come in under that budget kind of goes to them or to the magazine or something, as far as I know. What that creates is, for the publisher, a great way of managing how much magazines cost, and for the editor, it puts a squeeze on what they can produce, and for the end reader, the quality reduces because they haven't got the money to splash around. So you'll get features on cars that are in Austria or somewhere like that, but the person won't have gone there to drive that car. They'll have phoned them up or they'll have emailed them, and they'll have got, and then they'll write the article from that. That doesn't tell you what the car's like. The article's still good. Don't get me wrong; it's still worth a read. I'm not complaining about that. I'm not saying don't buy magazines; they are good, but there was a world in which magazines could give you a more in-depth view of something. So I can find out about that car on the internet in the same way, and I can find out kind of 60% of those facts, and the remaining 40% is a mystery. But I don't know if my life is worse off for not knowing that. And the same with the events coverage. So nowadays you can get people that are really good with the cameras and all that stuff. Go on the internet, you go on your Flickr or your Imgur or your forums or your Facebook, wherever it is that you get your event coverage from, and you'll see 300 pictures from a show. That's show coverage. That's really all you want. The magazines compete with that by having, 100, no, not 100, but they have a bunch of pictures from a show and like a paragraph about the show. They doesn't tell you anything about it. It doesn't tell you anything. It's basically competing with the internet in the same way. There's no point in competing with the internet in that way. You've lost. You've already lost. Don't do that. Do a better thing. But they can't. That's my point. Is that they are stuck between a rock and a hard place because their budgets are narrow, because they're making less profit because of mistakes that were made years ago. So it's a really tricky place for them to be. I really feel for them. I really feel for anybody that's working in magazines now. It could be better, but I don't know by how much, depending on what the effort they put in. Then you've got things like Speed Hunters come along. So Speed Hunters is a really interesting thing. Speed Hunters is bankrolled by Electronic Arts for the Need for Speed franchise. So they have no actual need to make money, really. They need to not lose too much money. And that has a massive behind-the-scenes politics thing goes on over the last few years. But that's doing what it does. Like, it rotates photographers and authors and all that kind of stuff, and sometimes the quality's great and sometimes it's quite samey, but it is what it is. It's bankrolled. It's basically like a magazine online, And for a lot of people that'll be enough. Like that will rival things like Fast Car Magazine and stuff like that. And what we've ended up with is people now get their stuff from specific places. So you want events news, you go on a forum. You want a specific bit of information, you go on a Facebook group or a forum. You just want to look at some pictures, you got your Instagrams, again you got forums, you got Flickr, you got Imgur, you got Reddit. And people will get those things on an hourly, daily basis, however quickly they consume their information. So where is the place for magazines at that point? And the place for magazines, for me, from my point of view, is in-depth stuff, and really well-researched stuff, and that level of access that actually just some guy on the internet can't get. And they're not able to provide that at the moment. And I then see, or don't see more to the point, magazines in shops. Like, magazines are still being published, like Kelsey Publishing are publishing a load of magazines, and I don't see them on the shelves. And they're not the only ones, there's other ones, I just don't see them on the shelves. And W.H. Smith in Waterloo, in the W.H. Smith in airports. Airports were like the place you could go to find all of the magazines because they had loads of them. I can't find them, so I had a quick look around on magazine finders to find them where I live, like particularly retro cars, and they're miles away. Like, I just can't get hold of them. And then where I work, 'cause I work in London, they're still miles away. So it's definitely a tricky time for magazines. So the question for the video is: are car magazines dying? It's difficult to argue against it, but I think there is still space in the market for them, and for me, I see quarterlies as kind of what would fill that hole in the market. So there's this thing called Rusties, which I've spoken about on the forum, which is being made by a Hungarian guy who I met up with a little while ago. That looks great. So it's going to be a quarterly magazine. It covers modified old cars and classic cars. Again, a little bit innovative. Like, it has like 2 covers effectively, and you can choose which side you like. And if you look at things like Octane as well, the high-end market, they're growing. Like that kind of high-end magazine is growing. People that are investing money in their magazine are growing their numbers, so that's good. Sort of cross-digital paper subscription stuff, I can see a world in which that will come a bit more ubiquitous and come good. Actually, on the subject of quarterlies, the Rodders Journal is still just a fantastic magazine. It costs £10, so the ability to do something in a slightly less regular basis can increase the cost of your magazine without it seeming unfair to the end reader. See, tell I work in websites. So there are opportunities out there, and I don't think the magazines are necessarily embracing them quite as well as they should, and all of their websites are terrible, except for one so far that I've looked at, which was the PPC website. So PPC guys, if you are watching this, well done on your website. The reason it's great is because it cuts the crap. You go on there, it tells you when the next magazine's out, it's got the content of the current magazine, it's got a contact form, and I think a little bit of an about. That's all you need when you're a magazine. I just want to know, subscriptions, where I can get it, what's in it, and when I can get it next. Oh, and if I want to send you a car, like, how do I get it to you? Obviously, they have a bit more activity on their Facebook group and stuff like that, but from a website point of view, that's fine. The other alternative is to go the whole hog, which is more of the Speed Hunters thing, where effectively the magazine's online. And then Speed Hunters actually moved into the world of having books and stuff published every few months, which is another way to go. So I don't think the car magazine is dying. I think the traditional publishers are lacking in innovation. And whilst they still have some level of readership, it's not necessarily dwindling, but I think it's on a gradual downward slope. And I think they can still do things to save it. And I kind of wish they would, because having paper magazines and books and stuff like that is brilliant. So that's me. That's just my thoughts on this. Hit the comments, or in the forum there'll be things which I'll also link below here, and hit the subscribe buttons wherever they are, and like it and all of that good stuff, because that helps us get into other people's recommended things. We'll be back. I've got to do effectively a follow-up video to this about social media and forums and car clubs and all of that stuff. Oh, and come to the Retro Ride Gathering. It's great.